He was one of the most beloved faces on television, a rugged and thoughtful character on a show that defined an era. But beneath the polished surface of Hollywood fame, the man who played Adam Cartwright was a nonconformist who secretly despised the very role that made him a star. What you're about to discover is the true, untold story of Pernell Roberts, a man whose life was a series of bold escapes. From the quiet town he grew up in to the hit show that couldn't contain him. And what happened to him after he walked away would change his life forever. Pernell Roberts' story begins not in the glitz of Hollywood, but in the rural South, where he was born on a spring day in 1928. Waycross, Georgia, was a small, devoutly religious town, and Roberts was raised in a strict Southern Baptist home. Church wasn't just a weekend activity, it was the center of his early life, a place where he was surrounded by sermons, choir music, and strong moral values. This upbringing gave him a deep sense of discipline and a serious, introspective nature that would follow him his entire life. Music, in particular, became a powerful outlet for him. He was a talented young musician, playing the tuba and the horn in his high school band. But even then, he was showing early signs of a powerful stage presence, carrying himself with a sense of purpose that set him apart. After high school, he seemed to be on a traditional path, enrolling at the Georgia Institute of Technology. But it wasn't a fit. The world of engineering felt stifling to a young man driven by art and music. He dropped out, not wanting to waste time on a path he knew wasn't his. In a bold pivot, he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in the late 1940s. The Marines gave him structure and discipline, but even in the military, his passion for the arts pulled him in a new direction. He found his place not on the battlefield, but in the Marine Corps Band, where he continued to hone his love for performance. His time in the service exposed him to a world beyond his small hometown, broadening his mind and sparking a new sense of curiosity. But a military life wasn't enough. He wanted to do something more meaningful with his life, something creative. After his 2-year service was complete, he made his final move toward his true calling. He went to the University of Maryland to study drama, a decision that finally put him on a path that felt right. Here, he truly came alive, performing in classic plays and developing his craft as a serious actor. He was a promising student, but once again, he didn't stick around to graduate. He was too impatient, too eager to prove himself on a bigger stage. Roberts left school early and set his sights on New York City, the beating heart of American theater. It was the 1950s, a time when a serious actor could make a name for himself on Broadway. Roberts quickly earned a reputation as a dedicated and talented performer, landing roles in prestigious productions. His deep voice, commanding presence, and emotional range set him apart, and he became a respected figure in the theater world. He had a reputation for taking his work seriously and pushing for more meaningful stories. It was this serious, rugged talent that eventually caught Hollywood's eye. Producers, seeing his potential, began casting him in dramatic roles and westerns. In 1959, he was given the part that would change his life forever, Adam Cartwright on Bonanza. The show became an overnight phenomenon, a cultural landmark that brought him into millions of homes every Sunday night. He was now a household name, a TV star. But fame didn't solve everything. In fact, it was just the beginning of his greatest conflict. The role that made him famous would soon become the very thing he fought against. But that was just a preview of the firestorm to come. Roberts became a household name playing Adam Cartwright, the eldest son of the Cartwright family on Bonanza. From the outside, it was the dream role, a lead on one of the most successful shows in television history, filmed in glorious color during an era when few shows were. But for Roberts, the show's massive success was part of the problem. He believed Bonanza was too simplistic, a show that presented a black and white view of morality with easy, neat endings. He craved the complex, emotionally challenging roles he had played on the stage, but here, he felt his character was stagnant, trapped in a formula. Roberts wasn't the type to stay quiet. He began to challenge the writers and producers, openly criticizing scripts in production meetings. He argued that the show could be so much more, a platform for exploring deeper social issues and allowing the characters to grow. While his fellow cast members were happy with the show's success and easy-to-follow format, Roberts saw it as a wasted opportunity. His passionate arguments and constant push for change created major tension on set. The producers, especially the show's creator David Dortort, had a clear vision for Bonanza, one that focused on family values and broad appeal, not creative conflict. Roberts's constant pushback earned him a reputation for being difficult and demanding. The tension came to a head in 1965 at the absolute peak of the show's popularity. Roberts was offered a new contract with a massive raise and more screen time, a deal most actors would have killed for. But he turned it down. He couldn't, in good conscience, continue playing a role he no longer believed in. He was tired of a character who, in his words, was a grown man who still had to ask his father for permission to do everything. So, at the height of his fame, Pernell Roberts made the shocking decision to walk away from the show. His departure was a massive blow, leaving the writers to scramble and fans confused. There was no grand exit for Adam, no final farewell. He simply vanished from the story, his absence never fully explained. The public reaction was mixed. Some people admired his conviction, but most thought he was ungrateful or arrogant. How could he leave one of the highest-rated shows on television? Critics labeled him as rebellious, too proud to be part of a team. But Roberts never regretted his decision. He stood by his choice, believing he had to be true to his artistic integrity. He continued to work in television and film, but he would never again reach the same level of fame he had on Bonanza. Still, he remained a man of principle. But his journey wasn't just defined by his career choices. It was also shaped by the loves and losses he faced away from the camera. The story of his private life would prove to be just as complex as his on-screen persona. Beyond the bright lights of the stage and the constant battles on set, Pernell Roberts lived a deeply private personal life. He was married 4 times, with each relationship revealing a different side of the man who preferred to keep his emotions guarded. These marriages weren't casual. They were intense, serious commitments that, like his career, often faced the challenges of his uncompromising nature. He was a man who gave his all, but a man who was also difficult to truly know. His first marriage was to Vera Mori in 1951, long before he became a household name. Vera was an academic and a respected drama professor, and they connected through their shared passion for the theater. Together, they had Pernell's only child, a son they named Chris. But as Roberts's career began to take off, their life together was consumed by his work. He was constantly traveling for stage roles and auditions, and the distance, both physical and emotional, became too much to bear. The marriage ended in 1959, just as Roberts was stepping into the limelight with Bonanza. It was a quiet divorce, but one that left a lasting impact, as the relationship with his son would later face its own heartbreaking challenges. A few years later, in 1962, he married actress Judith Anna Roberts. For a time, their relationship was a glamorous Hollywood affair, with the couple often appearing together at industry events. But behind the scenes, Roberts's idealistic and deeply principled nature made him a difficult partner. He had strong opinions about everything from art to society, and his emotional distance was a constant struggle for those closest to him. The two drifted apart, and their marriage ended in 1971. Roberts was once again alone, returning to a life defined more by his professional focus than his personal connections. The third time he married, in 1972, it was to Corinne Knack, a woman who wasn't part of the Hollywood machine. This was his longest marriage, one that brought him stability during a transitional phase of his career. After leaving Bonanza, Roberts was redefining himself, taking on guest roles on a variety of television shows. Corinne was a steady presence, supporting him as he navigated life after the show's massive success. But over 2 decades, as Roberts became more and more private, the couple slowly grew apart. His son's death would deeply affect him, making him even more withdrawn. After 24 years, this marriage also came to a quiet end in 1996. His fourth and final wife was Eleanor Criswell, a psychologist and professor he married in 1997. Eleanor wasn't in the entertainment world, and perhaps that was exactly what Roberts needed. By this point, he had almost completely retired from acting and was living a quiet life away from the spotlight. Eleanor provided him with the peace and emotional stability he had been searching for. She was by his side until his final moments, a calm presence in a life filled with professional turmoil and personal heartbreak. But even with a sense of peace at home, a tragic, unbearable pain was just on the horizon. For a man who spent his life in the public eye, Pernell Roberts was fiercely private. But nothing was more closely guarded than his relationship with his only son, Chris Roberts. Born during Pernell's first marriage, Chris grew up largely away from the cameras and the Hollywood scene. He was his father's one and only child, and though they shared a strong bond, it was a connection marked by the strain of a father's demanding career and a son's personal battles. As Chris entered adulthood, he began to struggle with serious issues. He faced ongoing battles with addiction and deep, dark depression. These were private, internal struggles that weighed heavily on his father. While Roberts rarely spoke about his son's pain, those close to him knew he was filled with constant worry. He was a man of principles and inner strength, but none of that could prepare him for the sheer helplessness of watching his own child suffer. Like many parents in a similar situation, he tried to help, but the relationship was often strained by the very problems he so desperately wanted to fix. Then the unthinkable happened. In 1989, at the age of 38, Chris Roberts took his own life. The news was an unspeakable tragedy that shattered Roberts to his core. For a man who had already carried so many private burdens, the loss of his only son was the ultimate heartbreak. With Chris's passing, Roberts lost not just a child, but a part of himself that could never be replaced. He never made a public statement about the event. He never sought sympathy or tried to turn the tragedy into a public spectacle. Instead, he withdrew even further into himself. After Chris's passing, Roberts became more reclusive than ever. The quiet sadness in his demeanor became a permanent part of his character. He rarely gave interviews and avoided discussing his personal life altogether. Friends and colleagues noticed a profound change in him. He was more guarded, more reflective, and carried a quiet sorrow that never seemed to lift. He retreated from the world, choosing a life of solitude and contemplation. While he never made it a public mission, reports surfaced that he quietly supported charities and causes related to mental health and addiction, finding a way to honor his son's memory away from the spotlight. This loss fundamentally reshaped him, and in the years that followed, he would continue to live his life on his own terms, facing his final chapter with the same quiet dignity. In the final chapter of his life, Pernell Roberts made a deliberate choice to fade from the spotlight he had so famously walked away from decades earlier. He had never been interested in fame for its own sake, and after a life filled with professional battles and personal tragedy, he was ready for a quiet, private existence. He found this peace living in Malibu, California, far from the bustling world of Hollywood. But even in this serenity, a final, secret battle was already underway. In the late 2000s, Roberts received a devastating diagnosis: pancreatic cancer, one of the most aggressive and unforgiving forms of the disease. True to form, he chose to keep his illness a secret. There would be no public statements, no interviews about his condition, and no plea for sympathy. He shared the news only with his wife, Eleanor Criswell, and a very small circle of loved ones. He began his treatments in complete privacy, facing the disease with the same quiet dignity he had shown throughout his entire life. He never wanted his illness to become a public spectacle, and so he refused to let it. During these final years, Roberts focused on the simple things that brought him joy. He read widely, especially philosophy and literature, and returned to his lifelong love of music. He spent his days playing the guitar, a passion he had held since childhood, and enjoying the tranquility of his home. His wife, Eleanor, was his constant companion and caregiver, providing the stable, emotional support he had longed for in his younger years. He had officially retired from acting in the early 1990s and never looked back, content to live out his days away from the demands of his former career. On January 24, 2010, Pernell Roberts died peacefully in his home at the age of 81. He was surrounded by the people he loved, and just as he had lived his final years, his passing was handled with quiet dignity. There was no public funeral, no grand memorial service. His body was cremated, and the news of his death was shared quietly through brief statements to the media. For fans who had followed him since his early days on Bonanza, it was a somber but fitting end for a man who had always been a mystery. Pernell Roberts lived on his own terms and chose to leave the world the same way, with a final, private curtain call. But his complicated legacy of integrity and rebellion would continue to echo for generations. Pernell Roberts died in 2010, marking the quiet end to a life that had been anything but simple. He was 81 years old, and though he had been a household name for a time, his final years were lived in complete privacy. He had spent decades fighting against the very fame that defined him, and in the end, he got the peace he was looking for. But the story of Pernell Roberts is much bigger than his career. It's a story about the cost of integrity and the price of a conscience. Roberts's most famous decision, walking away from Bonanza at the height of its power, was seen by many as career suicide. It was a move no one in Hollywood could understand, but for him, it was the only choice. He wasn't a greedy actor looking for a bigger paycheck. He was an artist who refused to compromise his principles. He would not play a role that he felt was shallow, no matter how much money it offered. This decision defined his entire legacy, showing the world that he valued his artistic standards above all else. In the years that followed, Roberts found success in other ways. He made a massive comeback as the lead in Trapper John, M.D., a hit medical drama that ran for 7 seasons. This role was everything he had wanted: complex, mature, and far more challenging than his time on the ranch. It proved that he hadn't been a one-hit wonder and that his artistic choices had been right all along. He spent the last part of his life away from the cameras, living quietly and enjoying his final years with his wife, Eleanor, who was with him until the very end. Pernell Roberts' life was a testament to his own motto: you have to be true to yourself, even if it's the hardest path to take. From his rebellious youth, to his principled stand against Hollywood, to his quiet final battle with illness, he was a man who lived and died on his own terms. His story reminds us that even when you have it all, the greatest struggle can be staying true to who you are. And sometimes, the most unforgettable part of an actor's story isn't on the screen at all. If you're interested in more stories like this, where we expose the real lives of Hollywood's most private stars, hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell. You won't want to miss what we uncover next.